My name again is Tamara Tracy, and we're here and we're going to talk about the commercial and industrial stuff, the big stuff. And there's a lot to cover. So stop me if I zip through something too fast. And we've already decided a chunk of it is going to go on to another session 2 weeks later from now. So if there are questions that come up, we will definitely cover it. But we're going to get right on into it. I don't know if you have your books, but similar to the way John had it, we're continuing with the box that has the page numbers. The first number is the footnoted version, and the second number is the non-footnoted version, which is nice and clean and easy to follow. And I'm just going to introduce you to the commercial and industrial districts, and then we're going to go into more of the details. We do have 6 commercial districts now. We've whacked out 4 of them. They've been consolidated into other districts. The C2 and C3C are going to be mixed-use districts. The C6 is obsolete, and what was C6 is going to be C4. And C7 and CID have been combined into just C7. Pretty straightforward. You've probably seen this format, but I wanted to reacquaint you again with it and remind you about it. When people ask, you have a place to point them, because you're shortly going to have this memorized on the back of your hand, right? Yeah, I don't, but maybe you will. The format for all of the permitted by right districts, as we call them, and what I mean by right districts, it means the ordinance says that you can do this use according to these standards. All you have to do is pull a permit. You don't have to go to a hearing. You don't have to ask special permission. Those are all the districts that we're most familiar with, like C1, C3, C5, industrial, 1, 2, 3, 4, D4, D8. Those are our by right districts. And they're all pretty much laid out the same way. They begin with the purpose statement. And the purpose statement's really important because it is how and why we've adjusted the standards the way they have been adjusted. And it also enables people to understand where they should look for certain types of development, certain uses and types of development. And the courts really love purpose statements. In each of the by right districts, we also include with that a summary table. And I want to stress it's a summary. It's a summary of the basic standards, most important core standards, and that's your setbacks and your heights, just so that you can get a flavor for that district. It also is a nice, easy way to just hand a single piece of paper to somebody and say, there's what it is. We do follow it with some pictorial examples. Okay, that's fine. Click that too fast. With some pictorial examples and some illustrations. I do want to remind you all about, and you're going to hear a lot of this because repetitiveness, because we've tried to interweave the concept throughout. In the summary table, we do give the distinction between the metro and compact context areas. And as a reminder, the map is in 740, and it will be on GIS, and it will be on Map Indy. Here's another illustration, a different version of the C3. And on the illustration here, it might be difficult to see the key, but I'll lay it out for you just so you know. It's got a key that's got the M for the metro and the C for the compact. And on the illustration, you'll see the C and the M used, and that tells you the person who's looking at it, oh, there's a different standard, a different number of feet for that setback if it's in compact versus metro. And in this illustration, this is the C3 for example, as an example. The metro is a 35-foot height limit, but the compact is a 38-foot height limit right here. So far, the districts we've talked about have been residential districts, and there have not been a lot of other standards, if you will. Well, in the commercial districts, we bring in the other standards, and it is the fourth item in the districts. And this is where another place where the districts become a little bit more unique. Those other standards right now include things like transparency and roof line and doors and entrances and things of that nature. Because this is very new for us, Indianapolis, I wanted to take a little bit of time and talk about those other standards. In the commercial districts, there is a transparency requirement. Transparency is the ability to see, well, transparent, just like the word said, see through things. Well, when we talk about the transparency of a building, we're talking about the windows and doors. And it's not just windows and doors plastered with signs or plastered with product. It's what you can see through, a two-way visibility going through it. And there is a certain minimum requirement, and it's expressed in a percentage. It's a percentage of the wall space. And we do provide a guidance on, or an explanation of how you figure that out, and where would you think that might be? Where would that guidance, do you think that guidance would be? Anybody? Pardon? No. Nice try. He said sign ordinance. No.
Development standards?
Close. Where you find your measurements and calculations is in the general provisions. This is the chapter 740 at the beginning. All of your measurements and calculations are at the beginning in chapter 740. That is where I've pulled this image from, and you'll find the written out explanation of how you do a transparency, so you don't have to memorize it as I'm telling you that. This language is in all the districts that have transparency. It's going to be worded the same. The numbers may be different, but the wording and the calculation is going to be the same. You have two instances, and I've highlighted in yellow up here the first instance, and that is just your basic primary building. And it says on each primary building that has a public pedestrian entrance, so that's not your fire escapes or anything like that, a public pedestrian entrance shall have 40% of the wall surface area be transparent. Well, let's see. Of that wall area, we're only concerned with the area between 3 and 8 feet. Because if you think about it, from here to up there, that's what you really need to see if there's anything of interest in that building perhaps for you, or if there's anyone maybe out there with nefarious intentions, or maybe something good or bad is going on inside. It's a way for a person approaching the building, or leaving the building for that matter, to see what's going on around them so that they can keep themselves safe. And also, probably more importantly, it's an enticement. It makes people feel like they want to go there when they can see what's going on. Generally, it's a happy thing. It increases the walkability and pedestrian friendliness of a building by having that transparency. And when an area is walkable and it's pedestrian friendly, it's also economically friendly. It's a way to keep our business areas vital and vibrant and occupied. So we're concerned with that 3 to 8 feet right here. And what we do, the next part of it is it says within 50 feet of the entrance. So you take the entrance and you basically go out 50 feet on each side. So for that 50-foot section, between 3 and 8 feet, 40% of that has to be glass, transparent, so you can see through it. Okay. I know somebody out there has figured this out right already. Between 3 and 8 feet is 5 feet, right? Okay, can I have some heads shaking here? Yeah, okay, wake up, wake up. Okay, it's 5 feet, and it's going to be max 50, right? Okay, so that's 250, right? What's 40%? Yeah, we're doing 40%. 40% of 250. Get that calculator going.
100.
Who said that? There we go. So basically, if you've got a building that's more than 50 feet off to the side here, you need 100 square feet right here. It's just, you can keep that in mind. Where it comes into play is on the sides of the building that are not 50 feet, such as this. This is not 50 feet. So you would take that width, and you would multiply it times the 5, and that would be your wall area, and 40% of that needs to be transparent. Let's go to the blue section. That's the other situation, and that's on the facade or side of a primary building that's located with, and that's key right there, located within 50 feet of a local or collector or arterial street. So that means if you're in a neighborhood and the building is within 50 feet, it needs to provide transparency. But you'll see in this one, it doesn't say that it's within 50 feet or within 50 feet of the pedestrian entrance. It just says of that facade, It's not limited to just that 50 feet. So if you're in like a C3 district, probably in the compact area, it's going to be probably close to the street. 50 feet is a good distance. They're going to have transparency of 40% all the way across that facade. Now, does it have to be solid going across there? No. They just have to get the 40%. So there could be spaces. It can be a strip going all the way across that's narrow, less than 5 feet, this feet. Or it could be that first area having display windows. Could be your full 40% right there, and the rest of the wall blank. It just needs to be 40% of that wall area. We ran several examples of this when we were doing this. Most of the buildings I'm going to assume that you're all familiar at least a little bit with Broad Ripple. You've gone there, maybe driven by it or through it. Yes? Yes. Okay. You guys have to help me here, because you got to keep me awake. We explored all of those windows and all that transparency there, and they have a really high level of transparency in Broad Ripple. So that gives you an example, I hope, a picture in your mind of what a highly transparent building and environment is. You could probably recall some of your shopping experiences at some of the big boxes in more auto-centric areas. They don't have a lot of transparency. It's all blank wall. Well, we need to have a little bit, we're introducing a little bit of that transparency with what's in the gold there to those areas. Hopefully, it will improve crime prevention and improve the overall environment that people enjoy shopping and working with. Because I feel guilty to say this, but windows are a good thing, wouldn't you say? Yeah. Okay. Does anyone have any questions?
Is that the pedestrian entrance, primary entrance or any entrance?
As long as it's a public, it's got to be. It can't be like a security door that only like you got to have one of these. Pardon?
Some storefronts have 2 entrances. So
Right.
each
one needs to have it. But like their loading dock area, that does not need to have those doors there. They don't need to have it there. Emergency fire exits do not need to have it. Went through the five districts in the commercial districts. The first 5, basic, well, they're not even the basic because we got CS thrown in there. 5 of them have 40% transparency, but the C7, which is for the bigger stuff, it only needs 30% transparency. We don't anticipate that those C7s being in a real neighborhood kind of context, but we still need to have transparency for minimum safety standpoint, for minimum safety standards. And just as a side note, this is one of the elements that IMPD was advocating very strongly for, is because they need to be able to see in and see what's going on. And if you think about it, next time you're in different new buildings, new experiences, just take a mental check of your own feelings on when you go up to a place that has windows or doors that you can see through versus those situations where you don't. If you stop and take and just say, what does this feel like? What is this environment telling me? How do I feel about it? I think you'll begin to see that it has some significant advantages. It definitely does in terms of crime prevention. We did not put it at this time in the industrial districts, so there are no transparency requirements in the industrial districts. The other element under that other standards, and I think that's still in the C3 if you're following along in your book, is that we are now requiring in all commercial districts, not industrial districts, but all commercial districts, that the mechanicals, if they're roof mounted, they need to be screened all the way around, all sides, by a parapet. Now, is that going to mean that the mechanicals from every single angle are going to be invisible? No. From the interstate, you're still going to probably see some mechanicals. But generally from the roadway and the sidewalks, you will not see mechanicals. Only when you have a significant grade change. So there's that. But not in the industrial districts. Let's move on to the industrial districts. We have 4, as opposed to 8 districts now, because we, as you recall, we got rid of the U and the S because they've effectively been replaced by the metro and compact context areas. Again, the layout is the same. Begins with the purpose statement, your summary of standards, your metro and compact context area on the standards table, and you've got some pictures and you've got some illustrations. In the industrial, because there is such a big difference between the compact and metro standards, we did provide an illustration for one for the metro and one for the compact context areas because the standards are notably different. But you'll have those. And there are no other standards in industrial districts, so you don't have to worry about that. So let's just go into now the commercial and industrial uses. Our world has pretty much evolved significantly since the ordinance we're operating under, our old ordinance. I'm just going to call it our old ordinance, which was put on a 1969 framework. Many of the uses don't even exist anymore, and we've got some that we never even dreamed of. And one thing that has happened with technological advances is commercial and industrial, the difference between the two begins to blur as you get more commercial and intense, and the industrial, in some instances, becomes cleaner and more hands-on. So we've had an integration between commercial and industrial activities, and that's why we squished them together and put them all together on the use table. And when we did that, we evaluated, we took every single category and we evaluated it in terms of risk. You know, what are they doing on the site that's risky? Do they have materials that are poisonous if released into the water or if spilled or combined with something accidentally? What kind of impact does it have on the surrounding area in terms of the types of, the volume of people that come to it, as well as the vehicles they're driving, noises, and we took all the risks and the impacts, and we figured out, you know, we looked at our districts, which we knew what we wanted because we have these really great purpose statements, so we knew what we wanted to create with them, and then plug them in that way. So consequently, some uses are going to be in commercial and industrial both because they tend to work and fulfill that purpose. There's 73 commercial and industrial land uses listed in the permitted use table. 73. There was a whole lot more in the old ones, as you recall. And in the old ones, you may or may not have understood what they were talking about. Like, what is it, a stamp redemption center? What the heck? Some of you might even typewriter repair. I was like, come on, okay. So what we did was we broadened it and we put them in those 73 categories. Then we defined those categories or those land uses. Every single line on that permitted use table, including the accessory and temporary uses, are all defined. Every single one of them. So if you have any question, just turn to the definitions and it will help. A couple of things I do want to stress, that I'm probably going to say it more than once today, is that if a specific use, if a narrow specific use is listed on the use table that would be considered a subset of another land use that's on the use table, it's not permitted in the broader category. It's pulled out and regulated separately. I'll give you an example. We have bars and taverns. Everybody knows what a bar and tavern is. Okay, when you throw entertainment in that bar and tavern, you now have a nightclub. That is a subset of the bar and tavern. Well, we regulate nightclubs differently, so it is a narrower, more specific use, and so it has its own line here. Bar and tavern, another subset of that would be the adult entertainment business. That would be another subset of that bar and tavern. Or it could be considered, you might call it a subset of the indoor recreation and entertainment. But it's a narrower use of that, of what you would think would be in there. And because of that, it is not considered a permitted use in those broader categories. It's only permitted in that narrower listing. The other item I wanted to remind you is where there's a P, it says it's permitted, is a primary use. You can also do that use as an accessory to another permitted primary use. Here's another example about how the definitions and the uses, land use categories, some are very narrow, like the tattoo parlor, and then some are, actually most of them, are very broad groupings. And in those definitions, you find a lot of good information. You wouldn't think it would take that many words to define just repairing people's stuff, which is basically what that is. But consumer services or repair of consumer goods. The heart of what it is that first sentence up here. But many definitions, kind of as a helper or as a guidance, they will have what you see here that identified by the yellow and the arrow is it'll include a list of examples. It is not an exclusive list. It is just a list of examples. And you may notice that many of those examples are the terms that are used in the current ordinance. We wanted to do that for some continuity. So if you're used to, seeing XYZ, you will then see it as an example under its permitted category. Here's another example of a broad land use. And again, it has its definition of what it is. And then it does have the listing of examples of what's included. But also this one has a list, well, which only has one, but nonetheless, it also identifies what's not included. We tried to do that as much as possible to make it as easy as possible to understand what goes where. Now these land uses are distinguished a number of ways, and a lot of them are simply by putting a qualifier on there that relates to their size or level of intensity. And so, and the most common ones are the light versus heavy, or light versus medium or heavy, indoor versus outdoor, temporary versus ongoing. Those are the common ones. Whenever you see one, you might want to check out its complement so that you can kind of get the distinction between the two. And that's what I've done here to kind of help you hit the distinction really quick. The difference between the light retail and the heavy retail is two things. Basically, the size of the package or the item, 75 pounds. 75 pounds is what the UPS driver that goes on the regular routes, that's the max they're supposed to carry, and the max size of package they're supposed to go through there without getting that special service that they have. It's pretty heavy though. I mean, it is kind of heavy.
I wouldn't make a habit of it.
No, I wouldn't make a habit of it either. The other thing about the difference between heavy and light is the fact that heavy retail tends to draw from a wider circle geographically, because they are big and heavy, and so you don't have them all over the place. So that's the big distinction between light and heavy. Basically, is the size of what they're selling.
What about a place that sells both regularly, like a Lowe's?
I cannot hear you.
What about a place that sells both? I mean, like a lot of both light and heavy?
You go with the most restrictive, the heavy. But if you look on your use table, hardware is called out as a separate subset. So, but yeah, you go with the heaviest. Here's one difference between light and heavy, and we'll just use between the vehicles, a light vehicle versus a heavy vehicle. And basically the distinction is the governing vehicle weight rating, which every car has. You just open your driver's door. You probably don't even realize it, but every time you get in, there's the little label that tells you what your GVWR is on your vehicle. The ordinance we have listed is 14,000. And this is an example of how fast technology changes. When we started this in 2010, 14,000 basically would cover a big, heavy, dual-wheel pickup truck. Well, now there are bigger vehicles that meet that rating, some panel vans. So that may need to be adjusted. But right now it's 14,000. And that's the difference between light and heavy. An area on the commercial industrial land uses that need definitely some explanation, if you've worked with the ordinance at all right now, is manufacturing. Under our current ordinance, soon to be old ordinance, the difference between light, medium, and heavy industrial was the size of whatever you were manufacturing, basically. Well, that really doesn't help us much in terms of using land use to protect safety and health and welfare. So we reevaluated all the manufacturing and realized very quickly that it's more about what's going on in the processes rather than what you're making. And so the manufacturing has been divided according to the processes that are included in that manufacturing. The light manufacturing, which is a lot of what goes on, is basically packaging, repackaging, and assembling parts together in unique ways. That's your light manufacturing. Now, your medium manufacturing is basically your mechanical reshaping of materials, like stamping and extruding and bending and all that kind of stuff. Your heavy manufacturing get into where there's a lot more risk and negative impact. And that's where anytime you're involving a liquid, a non-food liquid, non-edible liquid, mixing it with something else, because liquids quickly go into our groundwater, into the ground. And while it might not be a well field, it still eventually goes to our groundwater. Or stormwater, then goes to our surface water, and then it's just not good. There's risk, because no matter how good we are, there will always be accidents. There are always going to be accidents, because no one's perfect, right? Heavy industrial includes any kind of chemical or biological interaction. And we use this we use the description of the processes to get at the risk and the impacts, but also it makes our ordinance able to go into the future and cover activities that we haven't even dreamed up yet. Now, this is just 3 types of manufacturing. There are a few more that I want to hit on because they're unique. Anytime you have in any kind of significant quantity hazardous materials like explosives, dynamite, or maybe some biological hazardous materials. In the life sciences industries, there are situations where they deal with some pretty significant biohazards. Okay, anytime we encounter something like that, and you would find that out by looking at their data material sheets or just basically asking them, what do you do? Not what do you make, but what do you do? And it's pretty easy to distinguish what's a hazardous material because it's going to be your caustic stuff. If you're dealing with a tank of chlorine gas that comes in on a rail car, that's a caustic thing. So those get pulled out, and those are going to be in the I-4. Now, a unique thing that has happened of late, which is a really great thing, I think, is we have a lot of people who are doing that all-American entrepreneurial thing, and they're carving out their little niche thing, and they're doing their one-of-a-kind specialty creations, if you will. We call this the artisan manufacturing. It's where you have basically someone doing one-of-a-kind creations. The one I like to think about is the bike manufacturer out on the west side who makes bikes for professional cyclists. Makes about 12 bikes a year. I can't even imagine what they cost, but that's the kind of manufacturing we're thinking of when we talk about the artisan manufacturing. Now, the artisan manufacturing that most of us are aware of happens in craft brewer pubs. And we have a place for those too, because we handle manufacturing of food differently. If you noticed in all the other ones, it was non-edible items, non-edible ingredients, non-edible, blah, blah, blah. Food is different. Usually when you spill milk, it's not that hazardous. So we handle it differently. And the key thing is it's edible and it's for animal or human digestion. That is really the key thing right there. And then when you get to the artisan food and beverage, like your breweries, your craft distilleries, your bakeries, your boutique chocolatiers or cheesemakers and all that, it's smaller scale, but they still produce a lot, but it's very limited in scope and size, and sometimes they usually don't have, it's not heavily automated. And then we actually included for the microbrews and distilleries a reference to the limits imposed by the state licensure. So those are the big distinctive areas of manufacturing that you'll find in the industrial. Other ways we distinguish between different types of uses in a complementary way is the indoor, outdoor, temporary, and ongoing. And usually you'll find these in the accessory type uses. But there are some, I tried to find some, in the primary. I'm not going to go into it a lot, but I just wanted to make you aware that we have these distinctions and that when you see one, you should definitely go find the other or read the other one to make sure that you understand the difference between the two. We've kind of covered all the unique, well, most of the unique elements of what's going on in the use table. So let's go back to the use table and see what happens once we find these things and we're progressing across the use table with our commercial and industrial uses. Of course, you'll note that we have some S's along here for our bed and breakfast. And for our medium manufacturing, we have S's. And the S's indicate that they're permitted by what? Thank you. Special exception. The special exception standards, instead of repeating them 80 times like the current ordinance does, we put them in one place, and that's in the general provisions section. But a few of them have some unique standards they have to meet. And if they have some unique standards they have to meet, which the bed and breakfast does, that is listed in your use-specific standards. The other thing we have on this particular excerpt of the use table are these handy-dandy Vs. And I know we've talked about that, we've heard about them a little bit, but I just wanted to kind of highlight them again. It's for the vacant provision. And I want to highlight it because you're going to see the Vs in the commercial and industrial districts more than anywhere else. Well, exclusively in the commercial and industrial districts. And so I wanted to remind you that the vacant provision only applies to existing buildings, not land, buildings. And they need to be vacant for 5 years or more. And the 5 years does not start April 1st. It's just 5 years vacant prior to when they're coming in. As you recall, the use table has those broad land use categories. And the last section is for the accessory and temporary uses. I pulled out a few here. I hope you can read it on the handout. I hope you can read it here. I've pulled out these because these are the ones that you will commonly find in commercial and industrial settings, such as drive-through, your outdoor display and sales, your sidewalk cafe, your outdoor seating or patio of non-residential. I wanted to bring those out. We're going to go in depth on these at a later session, but I wanted to bring them out to you because you will encounter them in the commercial and industrial areas. And there is one thing that's not written down that I want you to realize right now, and that is your sidewalk cafe, and then your outdoor seating or patio, parenthetical non-residential. Those look or those sound the same, don't they? They don't. They kind of sound maybe a little bit. It might be. Well, let me tell you this. The difference between sidewalk cafe and an outdoor seating and patio area is that the sidewalk cafe is in the right-of-way. And the outdoor seating or patio area is not. It's on private property. Once again, I want to emphasize the accessory temporary uses, incidental and subordinate. If a use is permitted as a primary use, they can also do that activity as an accessory use. The accessory uses, if you stop and think about it, we have this use table, and then we have all these accessory and temporary uses listed underneath it. Well, why do you do that? Well, the reason why we did that is because we wanted to handle them individually, so that, because we don't know right now who's going to decide that they want their business of XY, they want to do a drive-through, or maybe they want to have a sidewalk cafe. We can't assume that all sidewalk cafes or outdoor seating area is going to be associated with an eating establishment. We can't make that assumption because that isn't what's happening right now. So we kind of set up the accessory and temporary uses as like a plug and play situation. We'll pick this particular accessory or temporary use and this accessory or temporary use and mix it with this primary use, and that's why we want to do it. So we wanted to be able to handle them individually. Because what was it? I think there's a bank going in on College that has an outdoor seating and patio area now. I never would have dreamed a bank would want an outdoor seating and patio area. It's like, what is this? You sit there and count your money? Is that it? I don't know. Anyway, so we wanted to make this document resilient and flexible for the unforeseen ways people are going to combine things. And because of that, all the accessory and temporary uses, again a reminder, have use-specific standards that you need to go back and check. Here's the laundry list of accessory and temporary uses that you will likely see in the commercial and industrial. Now that's not all of them. You might see the other ones in there, but these are the ones you're going to be commonly going to see. Some of these need a detailed conversation, and we're going to have that a little bit later, particularly when we're talking about the outdoor display and sales, because those use-specific standards are lengthy, I guess. Not complicated, but lengthy. But some of them are very simple and straightforward. So, but I just wanted to bring them up because we are talking about commercial industrial stuff. Okay. Use-specific standards. The first thing in the use-specific standards, and of course everybody checks the use-specific standards once you see the use that you were dealing with. That's the first place you go. Over to that far left hand and pick up those standards and look at them, because every use that's doing that has to meet those. Regardless of the district they're in, they have to meet those use-specific standards. The first thing in there is the spacing of uses, or the separation of uses. We don't have many of them. We do have 28, but we have, but there's, in the scheme of things, it's not all that many. We have 28 land uses that have some form of separation requirement. Either they have to be separated from another use like them, or they have to be separated from another district or a protected district. We took all of those separation issues and put them in one place, this spacing of uses table. It is also cross-referenced with your use-specific standards, so you can pick it up either place. The separation of uses can be required to be a distance away from a particular use, or it can be required to be away from a district. For instance, the adult entertainment has to be 500 feet away from a park zoning district, a PK1 or PK2, but it also has to be 500 feet away from a park, even if that park is not zoned for PK1 or PK2. So it's the use or the district, and we've tried to articulate that in the table. Most of them are districts, but some of them do a distance from a use. Now, the next question is, how do you measure that doggone thing? And of course, I know you all know this, but you would turn to the measurements and calculations sections in the general provisions chapter of the ordinance. And there's 2 sections to that ordinance, or that, yeah, to that. There are 2 subsections to that section. You're either going to be measuring from a use, or measuring from a use to another use, or you're going to be measuring from a use to a protected district or a district. They're a little bit different, but hopefully we can get through that. The first thing that we've done is we've made it so that where you start from is the same. Because right now under the old ordinance, sometimes you started from the property boundary, sometimes you started from the building, sometimes, it varied. We're doing all the separation measurements the same. They go from the building, and if it's in an integrated center, it's the walls of that integrated center bay. And that's where you start your measurement, and then you go out the requisite number of feet. Now, when you're dealing with a district, that requisite number of feet stops if there's an intervening street. So in this example, we go 100 feet out from that building wall, or that tenant bay wall, but that 100 feet circle should go right around here. But since there's an intervening street, it stops. So that if there was a a residential district here, let's just say, and this is a use that had to be 100 feet away from that residential, that use could still go there because there's an intervening street. Questions? Matt, you look like you have a question.
It used to go to like the center line where the zoning line is for the protected district across, and now that would go away.
Good call. It goes to the zoning boundary. So if the zoning boundary is at the center line, which most of them are, in this illustration, well, right, yeah, it would still be okay because you have that intervening street. The zoning boundary would have to be over here, which would be unusual, but it has happened. So if it's got an intervening street that's basically a wall. Okay, now let's look at the next, let's put up the other drawing here so it's a little bit, you can kind of see it a little bit better. Sometimes it's not the district, it's the use. And when it's the use, you just go across because, darn it, because this is the use to a use, and it goes to the property line, from the building to the property line. And there's no exception for the intervening street. This is what tries to illustrate that. Intervening street, probably should have used 500 feet for this drawing to make better sense. And this is from the building to another use because there is no intervening street. Streets don't matter. And that's the way, regardless of what uses you're talking about, if it's on that table, that's the way you measure it. Whereas right now, there were many ways that it was called out to be measured. I already told you there were 73 commercial and industrial land uses. We're not going to go through, so you can be happy about this, we're not going to go through all the use-specific standards for all 73 because I'm not going to read to you. But I wanted to put this particular page up because this was the best page I could find that showed the variety of standards that you're going to find in the use-specific standards. And also the fact that it may just be a one-liner, such as the dry cleaning plant or industrial laundry. It's one line. It can't be in a well field or flood zone. A very common standard that you will see is one that calls out specific uses or specific districts and applies a standard if it's in a specific district. Again, this is so that there's flexibility in the use table and also to create ways to put uses in places they might not have been before, but if appropriately limited, they could be okay. And so in some districts, you will have some additional standards. Like, for instance, the eating establishment. You'll probably be referring this to a lot. An eating establishment or food prep facility, drive-throughs can only be permitted in these districts. Of course, a drive-through is an accessory use, but it's calling it out right there saying, no, you can't have drive-through in the lower districts or other districts. Because if you look at the use table, eating establishments are permitted in more than those districts. Grocery store, well, it's got a couple of standards, but I wanted to call out the grocery store because grocery stores are somewhat unique. Well, it just is the same reason food is unique. We all need it. We all want to eat it, and it's good for us, and we should do it, and it's a necessity. So, that being the case, we wanted to put grocery stores in as many locations as possible. Now, to make it compatible, however, we needed to be cognizant of size and impact. And so when you see grocery store, don't automatically think your 120,000 square foot Kroger. The grocery store could be, like in New York City, a bodega. You know, just a little EB thing. So I guess what I really wanted to say is don't unnecessarily constrict your imagination for these land uses. Change is a good thing. Options are a good thing. So let's be creative, because that's what we're telling the community. Let's be creative. We've got places that need grocery stores. They can't support that huge thing. Let's be creative in how we can solve that problem. And so we wanted to have that opportunity for that creativity in our zoning ordinance. Now, I told you 4 weeks ago that you guys were the heart of our economic development, and that you guys are going to be creating more jobs than the 25th floor of that city county building ever dreamed of. And it's true. Because the power of the private economy, when harnessed, can be a fabulous thing and can create many, many jobs as well as many, many exciting opportunities for our neighborhoods. And you guys are on the front lines for that. So next time you go to a party, someone says, "What do you do?" Why don't you consider throwing out, "I'm an economic developer. I work in redevelopment," or "I'm an environmental steward," because that's what you are now with this ordinance. And you guys you're the first step. And if you guys fail, we all fail. So you're it. I don't mean to put a lot of weight on your shoulders, but in a way, I do. I have to. So I've been doing this a long time. Not just this morning. But it has been a long time this morning. I have a lot of passion for creating wonderful places. And I hope you guys do too. Because I hope you guys feel strongly about your community. And I hope you all understand that you have a role in developing this community that is probably greater than probably your whole family or all of your friends. What you're doing here is shaping the future. I hope that makes you feel good, because it makes me feel good. It makes me feel good looking at you guys' faces and realizing that as an old lady, I'm going to be in good hands. So I just want to take that pause there for the land use, as we transition now into the development standards, to share that, because that's the heart of zoning. That's the heart of what you're doing, is the uses. And then, but like everything, the devil's in the details, and the development standards are the details. And that's what we're going to get into. Just like everything, Some things have changed, some things haven't. But you will see a significant difference in the standards between the metro and the compact area. Generally, in the metro is where you're going to see the standards that are pretty close to what we have now, if not exactly. The compact is where we've adjusted them. The other thing that you'll notice between the metro and compact area that's very important is how the front setback is handled. In the metro context area, the front setback is taken from the proposed right-of-way. In the compact area, it's from the existing right-of-way. And that's going to save people about 10 feet. And in the compact area, that 10 feet really matters. A couple weeks ago, we had a new thoroughfare plan adopted. And it's going to be rolled out electronically on the using ArcGIS layers, and the public can access it through Map Indy. It's not in the book form kind of thing, and so it's going to be a little bit easier for digitally to use. They haven't rolled that out yet, but it will be coming in just a few short weeks. The other thing that we've established, which is new for us, is a maximum. We're all used to minimum setbacks. You know, that's just like the most basic thing. Well, we're introducing the maximum in a couple of districts. It was a hard row, but in the C1 and C3, and then in the CS, but in the C1 and C3, we have maximum setbacks. The C1, and especially the C3, you see those in your neighborhoods. They're supposed to be neighborhood-oriented districts. And it does not make sense for a building to be way far back if it's going to be serving a neighborhood. And so we put a maximum setback. It's the first, I think the first time in Indianapolis we've ever used maximum setbacks. So it's definitely something we're going to be monitoring and seeing how it works, if it produces the results we want or need. But it's pretty exciting, I think. So in effect, basically, if your neighborhood has a commercial area, C3 area, and if you wanted to walk to it, assuming you had sidewalks, if you wanted to walk to it or ride your bike, you wouldn't have to traverse a huge parking lot, maybe just a modest-sized parking lot or small parking lot. And that's a lot more comfortable, a lot more safe. The next thing I wanted to indicate is that there's a few height adjustments, a few tweaks in the commercial area between the metro and compact area. And you can also see that every single one has the ability, if they are abutting a protected district and have a transitional yard, they can stair step it back and still get some height. But we want to protect our residential areas, and so if a sensitive use is next door, they're pretty much limited to 1 story. But then if they move it back further, then they can go up to, well, you can read the numbers, go up to a few more stories. But we wanted to make sure that we protected our more sensitive uses. And because in the compact area, houses tend to be a little taller, not necessarily bigger, but tend to be a little taller, that starting height is basically 2 floors. In that same article, your lot and building dimensions, there's 4 other sections that talk about all the exceptions to these rules. Actually, most of them apply to residential, but a few do apply to commercial, and so I wanted to hit upon them. The first one is the front setback exception. Now I know the example kind of looks more residential, but the standard applies to commercial and industrial as well. We have, what I hope, have simplified how you do this averaging. Now, this average, I want to lay out there first of all, they don't have to. This is just an opportunity for them to adjust their front setback. They can still build it according to the standard, but this is an opportunity for them to move up probably a little bit closer. Our old standard meant you had to average all these setbacks for 200 feet, and it was just a convoluted mess. What I hope is simpler is basically we say if there's a structure the first structure within 200 feet, and this one happens to be, this is our site, this one happens to be the first lot, and there's a structure on it, you take the average of each side. This one, the first lot, is vacant, so we don't use that for the average. We go to the one with the first structure, and we use that. So the front setback averaging is just using this number and this number, not all those houses along each side. Because when you stop and think about it, those are the 2 buildings that are really impacted. These aren't so much impacted by where the setback is for this house. So let's just use what's next door. Basically, there's an exception in there that says if you have a non-conforming side yard, you can expand upon it a little bit. If you have a non-conforming rear yard, you can expand upon it a little bit. Well, in the commercial and industrial districts, you can only do that to the side yard. You cannot do that to the rear yard. Just FYI. The next one deals with our new, and what I think is very exciting, but it will be very challenging, is our stream protection corridor. The stream protection corridor is going to say you have to be a certain number of feet away from the top of the bank of a stream to protect our water quality. In this section, it says, what about stuff that's already in that area? Basically, it is if you're in that protected corridor, that 25 feet or 60 feet, you can't make it worse. You can be there, you can keep it. If it's got a parking lot there, you can keep the parking lot and all that good stuff, but you can't make it worse. Now, your lot is going to extend beyond that stream corridor. And this section just says, we don't care what you do on outside. You can do whatever you want in accordance with the other rules, but the stream corridor doesn't restrict you from doing stuff to a non-conforming structure or activity outside of that corridor. But we added that because people wanted to make totally sure that they were okay. So, totally sure they're okay. The next item in the dimensional standards I wanted to mention is something that you already know, and we're just continuing it, is that basically IHPC with their COA can modify all kinds of development standards in the commercial and indwelling districts. They can't do it in industrial. That's why I kind of brought it up. They can't modify the industrial standards. They rarely get that, but they can't do that. They have to get a real variance for that, or the people have to meet it. Now, we just passed out the development standards for the commercial and industrial, and you all know what's coming is the big fat but. There's always an exception. And the good thing about the exception is we put them all in one place. So you don't have to go digging for, where is that chimney exception? Where is that exception to the side yard for that bay window? We put them all in one place so that you can find it easily, hopefully. And I wanted to call out a few items, a few exceptions that apply most commonly to commercial and industrial. First one up there is the fuel pumps that don't have a canopy. There's not many, but there are a few that don't have a canopy because the canopy is considered building and all that good stuff. But what do you do with the pumps if they don't have a canopy? Okay. Well, and this actually came from someone here. That's an exception. And then we have the railroad exception. That continues. That's not new, but it's in there. And renewable energies and the outdoor seating and patio. Those are the ones that are going to come up in the commercial industrial venue. Now, on the height exceptions, we only thought it was fair that if we require them to screen on the roof line, if you recall, they have to screen the mechanicals up on the roof. Well, we thought it only fair that we give them an exception for a 4-foot parapet into the maximum building height. And then we have the renewable energy exception. You know anything about wind, you're probably looking at that 10 feet and just thinking to yourself, 10 feet's nothing, right? Because wind, when it comes around a building, it changes and everything. Well, you're right. There's not much efficiency to a wind turbine at 10 feet above a building. But that's today. And one industry that is developing rapidly is the wind turbine technology. And so they're probably going to be all hunky-dory with 10 feet in a matter of a few years. So it's one of the ways that we tried to make the ordinance forward-thinking. A question came up about the wind turbine height, and I just want to take a moment and kind of answer the question that I had before, which was, if you have a building here and it's lower than the maximum building height, because we've got 65 feet in some of our districts, what does that exception say? It says not more than 10 feet above the maximum building height. So it could be up there. It's not there. And this is in commercial districts. Well, no, it's in every district, the exception. But today we're talking about commercial districts. Again, even if it's this high, right now there's not much efficiency. You see the charts that talk about, we've got all this wind power and stuff. Well, that's way up there. People look at those numbers and they say, oh yeah, that's only 80 feet. No, that's 80 meters up there. So, I don't foresee that being used very often, but it's there if we need it. I mentioned the stream protection corridor. We've touched on it before. I wanted to hit it again because it is new. streams will be mapped in ArcGIS and Map Indy. We're working on getting the top of bank mapped, so you don't even have to worry about that. It does vary between the compact and metro. Access and connectivity. Basically, in commercial and well, actually, it's not just commercial industrial. If you're next to it, you need to connect to it. And that's for the greenway access, pedestrian paths, safe routes to school, if they ever resurrect that project again or program again. You need to provide that access. What does that access look like? Does it have to be what we see along the Monon Trail? No. It just has to be basically a walkway. But before we skip on that, I want to hesitate and highlight the very first thing. If you turn to that page in your ordinance, the 568 or the 482, you'll see that the very first one talks about the access to accessory parking areas. Now this applies to residential as well as commercial industrial, but we're going to focus on commercial industrial right now. And this is a somewhat big change because this limits, and for a long time Indianapolis didn't limit access. This limits where they can put their drive. And this is going to probably come into play probably more than most people would anticipate because Indianapolis has been so cavalier about our access. But what we have found is by allowing accesses at pretty much wherever, whenever, is we've really eroded the capacity of our streets in terms of parking and in terms of efficiency of getting people from here to there. So we need to use the infrastructure that we have, and that includes alleys. So if they have alley access, they need to use it if they have less than 200 feet of frontage. And the alley's there. You can't use it if it's not there. So that's a big change. Another change was actually we had some of the stuff in here already, but we made it more hopefully more clear. But it is to encourage on-site connectivity. You know, we've gone to all this trouble to have uses that are appropriate in various districts, like in our neighborhood shopping centers and in our employment generators. And we've gone to all this trouble of building mass transit and planning for mass transit, and we've gone to the effort of having more modes of transportation like bikes and stuff like that. So the real critical piece is connecting all of those. And how those connections get made are on the on-site connectivity. And that's where you all come in. So when somebody at a party asks you what you do, you can also say, I'm a transportation planner. Okay? All right. The big one is we need one walkway from the sidewalk system. And when I say sidewalk, that means sidewalk's in the right of way. Walkway is not in the right of way. But they look the same. So we need a walkway from the sidewalk system. Then we have to have internal connectivity between buildings and stuff. And this is going to come into play when you're reviewing like an integrated center or an industrial park or a business that's got several buildings or something like that. There has to be connections. And it doesn't have to be elaborate, but it has to be meaningful. the photograph has literally a brick, a brick walkway. That would be really nice, but that's really expensive, and you don't have to do that. It doesn't have to be that expensive. Yes.
The internal connectivity. So like on 86 and Michigan Road, there's like all kinds of.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so you know what the Studio Movie Grill is in that same plaza?
Uh-huh.
So behind there used to be a driveway or a street or whatever that connects to the next, to the area behind it. Yeah, so I was going through that the other day and somebody put up cement barriers so you can't get to that lot. So that would be not considered.
That would be the antithesis of what we're trying to do. Yes, that would be the antithesis. And they probably did that. Well, I don't know why, but I could speculate signs. But I think that everybody has a sign up there. It could be the fact that they feel that people are driving too fast, and so they want to stop it, or they're having parking issues. And that would be their solution. Probably solved it immediately, but will end up creating more problems that you yourself encountered. So they should come in and talk to one of you all, and you can help them figure out how they should do this. Because one thing that study after study after study has shown that when an area provides for this varied levels of travel, and they provide for the pedestrian and the bicyclist and all that, their numbers go up in terms of dollars. Their profitability goes up. So was it penny wise, pound foolish? That's what they're kind of being. Yes.
I have a question. So how much of that would apply to someone going in and developing an outlet within an established center versus a new
Well, you can only control what you control. You can only handle with what you control. So they've got this outlot. Woo, boy. And they've got the center here. And they may or may not have vehicle access on the street. They definitely probably will have it from somewhere in there. They can only control, or they can only do what they can control. But what they can control is access to the sidewalk. That's the first in A. And then between the buildings is, well, I'm just going to draw in a little parking lot there. Yeah, it's a bad drawing of a parking lot, but there it is. Who knows? Maybe they have their trash dumpster here. They just need to provide access. And since they don't do this, they can only do what they can do. But just like with the sidewalks, one lot at a time. You know, if everybody does that when they're developing, this guy's got a lot to do. Somehow, if everybody does their part, those little bits add up to something good. If everybody does their part. That's the whole key. It's kind of like a savings account. $5 a week, it's $5. Oh, okay, I can do without that Starbucks. But at the end of the year, you got some change, man. So a little bit adds up. It's just like the little pedestrian access, just like the little sidewalks. They all add up.
So that outline is still responsible for that sidewalk at front? In the right of way?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Like, if they're smart, they would do it where it makes sense for their customers, which you would think they would do, but a lot of times they just, oh, let's just plunk it in the middle. But a useful sidewalk goes to the corners of the properties. Because when was the last time that you marched down the sidewalk, went right to the middle, and then went up like that? I don't think I've ever done that in my whole life. Instead, what I usually do is walk here and then walk through their pretty landscaping to their building. So they should just put at the corners. Better utility, save everybody some effort. Yeah, we do not specify it, but you're going to be sitting there and you're going to say, you don't have on-site access activity, or you don't have good on-site access, pedestrian access. Well, what do I do? Well, you need to install that. Well, what does that look like? Where do I do that at? How do I do that? That's your opportunity to show, well, you might want to put it here. It's not required, but that's your opportunity. Yeah.
So as much as we would enforce that, how easy would it be for them to get a variance if they didn't go into the road? Or the,
My crystal ball says, no, I don't have a crystal ball, but a variance is going to cost about $2,000 to $6,000 in filing fees. It's going to cost them 6 to 12 to 24 weeks of time. I would be hard pressed to say that they would even ask for a variance of that. And when they got to the board, I mean, it's laughable. There's no reason that I can think of in Indianapolis, Indiana, given our terrain. I can't think of very many sites that would even come close to being approved for a variance. Now, that's not to say it doesn't exist, because I'm thinking of some very nice terrain in Decatur Township that maybe they do have a really high change of elevation between here and here. They might. And that might be an argument for it, but in a way, doesn't that kind of present an even greater argument to provide it? So that would be one that I would be hard-pressed to say that they would be able to get or even pursue.
In some cases with that, like for required parking, that's going to kind of take up, areas that you might put parking in, required parking spaces.
No, not if they've got a good designer, because there's always those remnant places on the parking. The number rarely ever works out exactly so that you hit that length and that length. And so that's where you take those snippets and make them useful. And again, it doesn't have to be the brick pavers and all that good rot. It can be striping. That's probably the most common. It can be terrain change or material change. Terrain change, what I mean is they raise it. And if they can do this in Wichita, Kansas, we can certainly do it in Indianapolis, Indiana. We're Indianapolis. 6 years ago, we rolled out, I think it was 6 years ago, we rolled out the sidewalk requirement. Well, we've made some refinements to that. First of all, DPW wanted their dollar amount raised, so we raised that. But we also refined a little bit the sidewalk widths. We expand them in according to the street classification as well as the zoning classification. And there's a chart in that section on page 571 and 488 in the footnoted. There's a little table, says what districts and then how wide it's got to be according to the street classification. And that's basically, hopefully logical that it's according to volume, expected volume, generally. The CBDs are bigger because there's more people using the sidewalk, more concentration. So there you have it. There are some other important regulations that we're going to go into in greater detail. Parking, landscaping, lighting, just to name 3 biggies. And they're very big, particularly in the commercial and industrial districts. So we will be hitting those later. As I mentioned, we will also be hitting the accessory and temporary uses and those use standards very specifically and hardcore in 2 weeks because I know they come up a lot. And so we wanted to take a deeper dive into them. So if you have any questions, come see me.